I think we as a society celebrate tech companies far too much versus the impact of technology. Think about the decades all of us have spent saying, can we have one tech intervention that makes a damn difference in education? We are definitely trying to build a scaffolding for the AI age.
I'm curious what you think the world will look like when 90 or 95% of all code is generated by AI.
Ultimately, the human is in the loop. I think we overstate the autonomy here. Remember, at Microsoft, we're not like this one-trick company. The hardest thing for us has been adjusting. The reality is, case studies don't help. You have to do it yourself. Technology is powerful enough to disappear.
This is something that recently went viral. You mentioned that AGI is just some nonsensical benchmark hacking, and the true value of AI is... All right, Satya, thanks so much for being here. So we're just minutes after you just hopped off the stage at Build. Can you explain how all these new developments really are coming together to build that new agentic web?
Yeah, first of all, thanks so much for being at the developer conference. And for us, it's interesting. When I think about this, we're at that moment, right? Whatever, 2-3 years into a platform shift, and you start talking about the platform, not just about the one app or the few apps and how they got built, right? Because you're about to sort of start scaling things in a much more, I'll call it generalized way, where as a developer, you can start seeing how to build it. I mean, one of the best things that we talked about was that Stanford demo, right? Stanford Medicine. Think about it, right? Something high stakes like a tumor board meeting. How do you use AI to have better tumor board meetings? Like, that's a real thing that one can go to work on. In order to make that the case, though, you really have to get data from pathology, from multiple labs, from PubMed, all getting orchestrated by multiple agents, right? And then have it show up where users are. In that case, it was Teams. If you're a teacher who goes to a tumor board meeting and then wants to go to a class as a teaching doctor, you want to be able to turn that into PowerPoint. It's like that type of orchestration is what you want to be able to build. And I feel to do that, you got to build up a real stack, right? Where every layer is open, it composes, there are standards, there are protocols, and I feel like we're finally there. And so what was exciting to me is to have the stack from sort of Microsoft 365 Copilot to Foundry all compose with some of these things like NL Web and MCP to create this agentic web. In some sense, I feel like even the original ethos of the web, maybe we can rediscover it, which is the true openness.
Yeah, and it sort of seems like Microsoft's trying to build this all-in-one UI where you can manage fleets of agents all in one spot. Is the goal a world where every knowledge worker effectively becomes this agent manager instead of just a knowledge worker?
Yeah, it's a metaphor. I think that makes sense, right? When we say we are definitely trying to build a scaffolding for the AI age, right? Just like, say, back in the day, we built Teams, right? You remember? Or even back in the day, we built Outlook, right? Before Outlook came together, calendaring was a separate app, contacts was a separate app, and email was a separate app. And so then we said, maybe we should build it all together, and Outlook was born. And then Teams, meetings was somewhere else, channels were somewhere else, and then chat was somewhere else. And we said, hey, let's bring that together. So I think always there's going to be a need for a new scaffolding. And in our case, with what I describe as the UI for AI, is you say, well, let's bring chat, let's even bring search, and then agents and things like notebooks and so on all together in one interface. And that's what we're doing with the M365 Copilot. And Teams is essentially the multiplayer version of it. But it's not the only, I'll call it, UI for AI. There will be many other places and many other developers will build them, right? You could say the UI for AI for developers is GitHub. UI for AI for some scientists will be, what we talked about in our discovery or some third-party application. So I think there's going to be a lot more richness on the UI layer where people will build different modalities for different workflows and different needs. But the interesting thing is the underlying capability, right? Where you have data, you have multiple models, you have these agent orchestration layers, you have these reasoning models now that are capable of taking intents and decomposing it into multiple calls to multiple models. That's, I think, the exciting thing.
The world of knowledge work is just changing so fast. And surely with any tech revolution, there will be some job displacement. What advice would you give to knowledge workers so that they effectively become these agent managers instead of agent replacement?
Yeah, it's a good way to phrase it, because I think it's sort of always helpful for us to separate out the knowledge worker from the knowledge work of today. Because if you think about it, right, if an alien intelligence had come to and seen the world, at let's say at work, even early 80s, and they would have said, oh, well, there's a typist pool, there is a slide pool or slide making pool. And then if they came back today, they'll say, oh, wow, all of humanity is a typist pool, because everyone gets up in the morning and with either two thumbs or with multiple fingers are all typing. But we are doing knowledge work. It's been right? So therefore, I think the levels of abstraction, whether it's managing agents, if I look at even the simple workflow from when I joined Microsoft in 92 to now, if somebody had to get prepped for, let's say, a customer visit, you would sort of go to the account team would write up a report, that report would show up in email, that'll get loaded into OneNote, and I would read it. And in fact, that was pretty much the sort of, I was preparing for most of my career those reports, and then eventually, reading those reports. In the last even 5 months, thanks to these things like reasoning models like Researcher, it's completely inverted. I just go prompt myself, hey, I'm meeting with the CEO of XYZ Corporation, pull all the stuff I need to know. It pulls from the web, it pulls from my emails, my documents, most importantly, my CRM system, my supply chain system, because most of these folks are both customers and partners of ours, gives me one comprehensive report. And then I share it with the account team, right? So think about it, the workflow is inverted. So you could say, as a CEO, quote unquote, I'm doing more knowledge work than I was doing, quite frankly. I am more employable today because I feel more empowered. I feel that I can get to information faster, collaborate with my colleagues in the company. So I do feel the best thing that can happen is diffusion. In this phase, I think any knowledge worker, whether you're in software, whether you're in just horizontal knowledge work, in finance, in sales, or in science, use the tools, change the work, you have the agency to change your work artifacts, the workflow around you. And of course, I'm clear-eyed that there is going to be displacement. And so therefore, the best defense against that is skilling, reskilling. And it starts by using tools versus not using them.
And developers arguably have seen the biggest shift to their workflows with the rise of AI tools and now agents, and GitHub's new Copilot coding agent is just another example of another tool that's effectively changing the developer workflow so much. You've actually recently said that Microsoft is generating 30% of all new code with AI. I'm curious what you think the world will look like when 90 or 95% of all code is generated by AI.
Yeah, it's a couple of different things. One is you got to remember, like when I look at the amount of deficit we have, right? If I sort of looked at, let's call what people say is tech debt or IT debt, right? Which is if you look around the world and said the number of projects that are still unfinished, the reality is we need a lot more software development in order to be able to really reach the goal of being able to work down that deficit. So you start there. We have a problem. That is, we don't have all of the software development capability and supply in order to meet the demand. Then you say, in that context, that's why I think all these form factors, right? Even code completions, super helpful. We always had IntelliSense, but we now just have better intelligence that works with code completions. Or I can highlight a bunch of code and have it explain it to me, draw a diagram. Even yesterday, they took some code and sort of just highlighted it and said, just give it to me as a flow chart. Like just that simple thing. Because I do better with visual stuff. Then, agents, right, where I can assign synchronously some tasks. So multi-file edits, the full repo changes that I want done, right? So that's all as an individual developer, I can stay in the flow, I can use these tools. Then to be able to, today, the launch of the coding agent is pretty cool because, like as I said, like even for me, and it's no longer sufficient for me to just file bugs, I got to get involved in even fixing bugs, right? So having a peer programmer that I can work with. And of course, remember, ultimately the human is in the loop. I think we overstate the autonomy here, right? Because even before it does any CI/CD thing, it comes back for a human review, right? And it can be, something that you can even automate with another agent. But ultimately, there is a workflow here where people inside of a development organization are going to work with these AI agents to essentially work down the deficit we have. That's the world I sort of see more so than anything else.
Copilot fine-tuning was another really interesting announcement. Giving enterprise the ability to unlock, their own data and fine-tune their own copilots with it is a major unlock. I'm curious where you think these domain-specific agents will really excel, and is there any types of proprietary data that will give companies a real advantage over just like generic Copilot?
Yeah, it's a super important question. In some sense, what is the firm going forward, and what is that edge, the knowledge edge of a firm is the real question. And that's why I think I'm really excited about this Copilot fine-tuning, because the idea is to be able to take what you have as a firm, which is your knowledge, your data, and use it to essentially tune the Copilot system. But here's the interesting thing, right? You asked, which is, what's the sustainable advantage here? And the sustainable advantage is to get a new sample, to then use these reasoning models with your data to then be able to do RL in the real world, right? So which is the reward function from the market, reinforcing the application of your knowledge to fine-tuning the new sample. Like that's the virtuous cycle. So the world keeps getting better in terms of its model capability. Firms are about taking that. That's ultimately a commodity that you bring into the firm. You then, because of all the knowledge work you do internally and the data you have, fine-tune it, put out the output into the world, get the signal. It could be a customer thumbs up, it could be marketplace thumbs up, whatever. That's the reinforcement reward. And then you go back. And that, I think, is sort of the new theory of the firm in my sort of sense of how one needs to go. And you really are going to have to perfect that loop.
You've led Microsoft through multiple tech transformations. What advice would you give to companies trying to restructure around this agent era?
In tech companies in particular, and Microsoft in particular, because remember, at Microsoft, we're not like this one-trick company. In other words, at some level, the hardest thing for us has been adjusting. Right? When I came to Microsoft, at that time, it was unclear. Our existential competitor was Novell. And so over the years, Microsoft has had to learn in the hard way. Sometimes we've gotten it right, sometimes we've gotten it wrong, how to fundamentally change three things: how we work, what we work on, and how we go to market, right? And that muscle of fundamentally reinventing the production function simultaneously with the product and the innovation, as well as the go-to-market and the business model, is a hard thing. It's a harsh thing because in some sense, I wish sometimes I worked on one product that lasts, multiple decades. For us, it's not been the case. Even something as big a hit as Windows, stopped growing at some point. And so therefore, it meant that we had to build other businesses. But I think ultimately it comes down to culture and capability building that allows you to take more shots on goal. And that, I think, is what one needs to do as any one of us faced with these shifts. If you have a stable business, fantastic. Then this is tailwind. You can even take and get more leverage out of it. If you have a business that's in decline, you can then use this as an opportunity to reinvent yourself. But ultimately, it comes down to this culture, capability, and then hunt for new concepts that I think is what you need to practice. You can't, one of the things I think a lot about is we all, I do this as well, we all sort of look at the shining company of the era. The reality is case studies don't help. You have to do it yourself, right? Now, somebody said to me once, which is, you don't get fit by watching others go to the gym. You have to go to the gym. And that, I think, is what this change is all about, right? It's not about admiring someone else, but it's about hard yards yourself.
I want to touch on upskilling, kind of from the top down. So from my perspective, my company, we work with a lot of different enterprises, kind of consulting them on their AI strategy. And what we've seen is that there's a lack of personalization in AI education. For example, the tools and workflows a marketer might use are different than a developer or someone in customer success. So I'm curious how Microsoft is kind of educating their employees from the top down on this sort of personalized education.
It's a great point. So one of the things that we are emphasizing is getting the tools in, right? Because if you look back even, like one of the things I'm heavily influenced by is how PCs became standard issue, right? It's fascinating to study even how PCs penetrated the enterprise. First, someone in legal said, wow, this is great to write contracts up because I need Word and, with all of its footnotes and what have you. Finance obviously loved Excel, right? Because, wow, it can help me do models and so on. But then it turned out that people don't work in their silos. They work in teams. And so then at some point, like take even the way we did forecasting back, pre-PC, right? Basically faxes went around, somebody did an inter-office memo, and then eventually, you got to a forecast. Whereas, once the PC became standard issue, you just took an Excel spreadsheet, entered some numbers, sent it an email, all your area leads entered numbers, and you had a forecast. It changed the work artifact, and the workflow. And it happened not by going to a training class. It actually happened by diffusion of the general purpose tool, in that case, PC on Office. So a little bit of sort of what I'm seeing even inside of Microsoft, whether it's with GitHub Copilot or whether it's with the M365 Copilot or anywhere else, is just the diffusion of the tools. I'll just give you, one of the best examples at Microsoft was, I was talking to an engineer in our networking, our AI WAN, right? I mean, I was talking about, man, the AI WAN is growing like crazy. The number of fiber operators we work with is like some, insane number. And by the way, all the DevOps on it, right? If there's a fiber cut somewhere, is all manual, right? Literally, it is emails and calls and so on. So she just said, okay, I can't deal with this. I have to really automate this because otherwise, all of Microsoft will be just working on DevOps of fiber. And so she just built an agent, and in fact, a multi-agent orchestrator, right? And by the way, she just did this using some of the low-code, no-code, and the Foundry tools, right? That ability to empower our people with tools and agency to go and look for the workflow closest to them, that I think is what needs to happen. Just like how we were able to use, I think I always say Excel is the greatest most ubiquitous programming tool in the world. And all of us learned how to program in Excel, essentially. And that's the thing that I think is going to happen again.
I know we don't have much time here, but I want to quickly touch on proactive agents. So behind the scenes, we actually got a demo of like on-device proactive agent working on the Copilot Plus PCs, where this agent essentially opened up Outlook and summarized the email without internet. Mm-hmm. But that's just one example. Are there any examples that you have that you're really excited for?
Yeah, so I think that if I look at the continuum, right, so I'm really looking for, in some sense, I'm a big fan of this Mark Weiser quote about ubiquitous computing, right, where technology is powerful enough to disappear, right? So therefore, to some degree, the march of natural user interface and so on is about doing all the things that I intend to be done with the least amount of, I would say, friction, right? So that's why I think when I want, interpret my intent and plan and get it done, right? So that's where I think some of these proactive agent stuff comes in. And I want to be in control though. Like, for example, that's why I think the QA agents, for example, the computer use agents have to sort of get to a point, one, they've got to be fast and better and more reliable. But more importantly, they have to be chained as part of some intent of mine, right? It's not like I'm going to go give task. I'm going to have a high-level intent, and then someone's going off and doing a bunch of work, and I can inspect. So that's why I think like this GitHub, coding agent, the session log, it's pretty cool. Like I go back after having assigned, it's like I'm watching the session log with all the draft commits. Right, so that I think is the balance, right? So in an interesting way, we talk about the proactive agent and a session log. And that way then it's sort of more transparency of it. And then when you invoke multiple of them, you are able to still track effectively what's happening.
One last question for you, and this is something that recently went viral. About 2 months ago, you said, you mentioned that AGI is just some nonsensical benchmark hacking, and the true value of AI is global economic growth. Where do you see agents having the most value in that regard first?
It's a great one. I mean, to me, take healthcare. What is it? 19-20% of our GDP in the United States is in healthcare. A lot of that cost, the inefficiency, if you talk to any of our providers, is all in the workflow, right? They're working so hard to provide unbelievable care, except sort of, and they're using all these digital systems, but they're really not able to tame the complexity and reduce the cost. And so if there is going to be one place where I would love to see that productivity gain, would be like that, that multi-agent orchestrator for healthcare that we just launched, used by Stanford, become ubiquitous. And there are stories where people are saying, oh, wow, this has been the biggest thing that, every provider is able to provide better healthcare at lower cost, right? So something like that has to happen, because my only comment there was not about any sort of shot on any great AI research. It is more, I think we as a society celebrate tech companies far too much versus the impact of technology. Quite honestly, if there was a more balanced way to talk about sort of not the tech industry, but the use of technology, right? That's why even the Copilot being and think about the decades all of us have spent saying, can we have one tech intervention that makes a damn difference in education, right? Finally, you have real statistical evidence, thanks to that World Bank study in Nigeria, that you give people Copilot there or any other agent, it doesn't matter, something changes. That's the story to me, right? That's why I joined the tech industry. I mean, it was a very different time, and suddenly it became like, the place we were celebrating ourselves, and I just hate it. I just want to get to a place where we're talking about the technology being used, and when the rest of the industry across the globe is being celebrated because they use technology to do something magical for all of us, that'll be the day.
Okay, well, I think that's all the time we have. Thanks so much again for doing this, and congrats on the great keynote.
Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure.
Great.
Thank you.